The manager of Boston's most elite restaurant, the Beacon Crest, believed he was the ultimate gatekeeper of status. On a crisp autumn evening, he looked at Dr. Serafina Hayes, a brilliant self-made black woman who helmed a billion-dollar tech empire, and decided she wasn't worthy of a table. He dismissed her with a smirk, confident in his power. He made a fatal error. He assumed his judgment was the only one that mattered. He had no idea that as she stepped outside onto the cobblestone street, Dr. Hayes wasn't calling for a taxi. She was making a call to acquire his entire company. The air inside the Beacon Crest was thick with the scent of old money and white truffle oil. It was a carefully curated atmosphere, designed to feel less like a restaurant and more like the private dining room of a 19th century railroad baron. Sunlight softened by the August Bostonian twilight slanted through tall mullioned windows, catching the dust motes dancing over tables draped in heavy damask linen. Each place setting was a fortress of polished silver with more forks and spoons than most people used in a week. The clientele matched the decor: silver-haired men in muted bespoke suits and women with pearls that seemed to have been passed down since the Mayflower. They spoke in hushed, confident tones, the sound absorbed by the dark mahogany paneling and the plush Persian rugs. Into this temple of inherited privilege walked Dr. Serafina Hayes and her chief counsel, Chloe Jensen. Serafina, or Sarah, as Chloe called her, was the antithesis of the room's prevailing aesthetic. She wasn't old money, she was the supernova of new creation. At 38, she was the founder and CEO of Ethereum Logic, a company at the bleeding edge of quantum computing and ethical AI. Her mind had crafted algorithms that were reshaping global logistics, medicine, and finance. She wore a tailored suit of cobalt blue, the sharp lines a stark, beautiful contrast to the room's stuffy palette. A simple, elegant diamond pendant, a gift to herself after Ethereum's IPO, rested at her collarbone. Her hair was styled in intricate locks adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the light. She radiated an energy that was pure, concentrated power, not inherited but forged. Chloe, sharp and observant in a classic black dress, scanned the room with a lawyer's practiced eye. "You know, Sarah," she murmured, "for a place that charges $400 for a tasting menu, you'd think they could afford better lighting? It feels like a crypt in here." Sarah chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to momentarily disturb the room's reverent silence. A few heads turned, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to faint disapproval. "They call it ambiance, Chloe. It's to make you feel exclusive." They approached the maître station, a heavy carved lectern that looked like it had been looted from a cathedral. The man standing behind it was tall and impossibly thin, with a severe face that seemed permanently pinched in a state of mild disdain. A small engraved brass plaque on the lectern read Bartholomew Finch, General Manager. Mr. Finch looked up, his gaze sliding over Sarah and Chloe, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on Sarah's face and hair, before settling on a point somewhere over their shoulders. He didn't offer a greeting. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice smooth and even. "We have a reservation for 2 at 7 o'clock. The name is Hayes." Finch's thin lips barely moved. He consulted a large leather-bound book, running a pale, manicured finger down the page with theatrical slowness. He did this for an uncomfortably long time, his silence a deliberate tool of intimidation. "Hayes," he finally repeated the name, sounding like an unpleasant taste in his mouth. "I don't seem to have a reservation under that name." Chloe's posture stiffened. "I made the reservation myself 3 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email right here." She reached for her phone. "That won't be necessary," Finch said, closing the book with a soft final thump. "I assure you, if you had a reservation, it would be in the book. Perhaps you made an error with the date." The implication was clear. The error was theirs, not his, not the restaurant's. "I can assure you," Chloe countered, her tone hardening. "I did not." Sarah placed a calming hand on Chloe's arm. She had dealt with men like Bartholomew Finch her entire life. They were the gatekeepers, the petty tyrants of small kingdoms who derived their sense of worth from their power to exclude. They were predictable. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up," Sarah said, her voice still disarmingly pleasant. "We were hoping to celebrate a significant company milestone tonight. We've just secured the largest infrastructure contract in Boston's history. I'm sure you can find a table for us." She offered this information not as a boast, but as a bridge, a way to establish her credentials in a language he might understand: money and importance. Finch's expression didn't thaw. It tightened. The mention of a massive contract seemed to annoy him rather than impress him. To him, she was an outsider attempting to buy her way in with new money, which in his world was a vulgarity. "Ma'am," he said, and the word ma'am was an insult coated in a slimy film of feigned respect. "The Beacon Crest is fully committed this evening. Our tables are booked months, sometimes years in advance by our established clientele." He glanced meaningfully at a nearby table where a man who looked like a U.S. senator was laughing quietly with his wife. "We simply do not have walk-in availability." "Shop it, we are not walk-ins," Chloe insisted, her voice rising slightly. "We have a confirmed reservation." "The book says otherwise," Finch replied, his eyes like chips of ice. He then did something unforgivable. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if letting them in on a dirty secret. "Perhaps," he said, his gaze fixed on Sarah, "a restaurant like this is not what you were looking for. The South End has many vibrant and more suitable options for your kind of celebration." The silence that followed was cavernous. "Your kind." The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. It wasn't about a reservation anymore. It was about her face, her hair, her success. It was about the fact that she was a black woman standing in a space he considered sacredly, exclusively white. Chloe was speechless, her face a mask of fury. She looked at Sarah, ready to unleash a torrent of legal threats and righteous indignation that would have scorched the varnish off his lectern. But Serafina Hayes was preternaturally calm. The fire that Chloe felt on the surface Sarah held deep inside, banked and controlled like the core of a star. It was a fire that had fueled her rise from a cramped apartment in Dorchester to the boardrooms of global power. She didn't rage. She calculated. She looked at Bartholomew Finch, really looked at him, and saw him not as a man, but as a problem, a variable in an equation. And like any equation, it could be solved. She held his gaze for a long moment, a silent promise passing between them. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I see," she said softly. "Thank you for clarifying the situation, Mr. Finch. You've been most illuminating." She turned to Chloe. "Come on, let's get some fresh air. I need to make a phone call." As they walked towards the heavy oak door, Finch's smug, triumphant smile was reflected in the polished glass. He believed he had won. He had protected the sanctity of his gilded cage. He had no idea that Serafina Hayes wasn't just leaving the restaurant. She was going to buy the cage, the key, and his leash. The cool evening air on Charles Street was a welcome shock after the suffocating atmosphere inside. The gas lamps of Beacon Hill cast a gentle golden glow on the cobblestone sidewalks. For a moment, Chloe was too angry to speak, pacing back and forth in a tight, furious circle. "I cannot believe that just happened." She finally exploded, her voice a low, fierce hiss. "The unmitigated gall, more suitable options. I'm going to sue him, the restaurant, and whatever corporate shell they hide behind. I'll have his smarmy, condescending head on a platter. We can file for public accommodation discrimination by morning. The press would have a field day." Sarah held up a hand, silencing her. She was leaning against the wrought iron fence of a small manicured park, her eyes distant, her expression unreadable. The initial sting of the insult had already been processed, filed away, and converted into fuel. Anger was a luxury. Action was a necessity. "A lawsuit is too slow, Chloe." Sarah said, her voice quiet but resonant with an unnerving intensity. "A public shaming gives him a platform to play the victim. He feeds on that kind of attention. I'm not interested in a battle of headlines. I'm interested in a conclusion." "A conclusion? What kind of conclusion?" Sarah finally looked at her, and a slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. "The permanent kind." She pulled out her phone. It was a sleek, custom-built device from Ethereum's R&D department, its case a matte black composite material. Her fingers moved across the screen with purpose. She wasn't looking for a different restaurant on Yelp. She was opening a secure communications app. "Who are you calling?" Chloe asked, her anger giving way to curiosity. "An old friend," Sarah replied. She bypassed her usual contacts and dialed a number that wasn't stored under a name, but a project code name, Project Sterling. The call connected in less than a second, an encrypted direct line. "Sarah, A deep baritone voice answered without preamble. There was no hello, no pleasantries. This was the sound of business at the highest level. Benjamin Sarah said, her tone shifting, becoming sharper, more clinical. Good to hear your voice. I hope I'm not interrupting. The man on the other end, Benjamin Carter, was the managing partner of Sterling Peak Capital, a private equity firm so powerful and discreet that it made Wall Street giants look like noisy street vendors. Ethereum Logic and Sterling Peak had a deeply symbiotic relationship. Sarah's AI was used to predict market trends for Sterling Peak's acquisitions, and in turn Carter's firm provided the financial muscle for some of Ethereum's more ambitious expansions. They were allies, colleagues, and occasionally co-conspirators in the grand game of corporate chess. For you, never, Carter replied. What's on fire? A restaurant, Sarah said simply. There was a pause. A restaurant, Carter repeated slowly, the gears in his formidable brain clearly turning. This isn't about a bad meal, is it? You don't call me for a bad meal. It's called the Beacon Crest, here in Boston on Beacon Hill. Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the restaurant's glowing sign. I believe it's the flagship property of the Cromwell Hospitality Group. Chloe's eyes widened. She knew that name. Cromwell Hospitality was a small but prestigious group of old-world hotels and restaurants, known more for their reputation than their profitability. On the other end of the line, Benjamin Carter let out a low whistle. Alistair Cromwell's little empire. I know it well. We looked at acquiring them about 18 months ago. Passed on it. The books are a mess, the whole operation is leveraged to the hilt, and Cromwell himself is a dinosaur clinging to a bygone era. Why? This was the opening Sarah needed. Her mind, capable of processing quantum data sets, was now focused on a single elegant line of attack. My diligence team flagged Cromwell Hospitality for me about a month ago, Ben. A quiet little side project. She said, a small fabrication to accelerate the timeline. In reality, her AI-driven market analysis tool, Oracle, had flagged the company as a high-risk, high-reward target for hostile takeover 2 months prior. The company was bleeding money, propped up only by the sterling reputation of its name. Alistair Cromwell is in over his head. He's personally guaranteed most of the company's debt, and his primary lender, North Star Banking Corp., is about to call in their loan. He's desperate. All true, Carter confirmed. He's been quietly shopping the company around for a year, but his asking price is delusional. He thinks the name is worth more than the balance sheet. And that, Sarah said, the smile returning to her voice, is where you come in. Sterling Peak has a substantial non-voting stake in North Star Banking Corp. Do you not? Chloe audibly gasped. She was seeing the chessboard now, and it was breathtaking. Sarah wasn't just playing 3 moves ahead. She had designed the entire game. Carter chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. You do your homework, Sarah. Yes, we do. It's part of our financial services portfolio. Then you know that North Star is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on Cromwell's assets next week if he can't secure a buyer. Cromwell will be ruined personally and professionally. Sarah laid out the facts. He's out of time. His delusional asking price is about to become a fire sale price. He'll have to sell to the first bidder with cash in hand just to avoid total annihilation. Carter finished her thought. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we become that bidder, Sarah said, her voice dropping, filled with the thrill of the hunt. I want you to call Alistair Cromwell. Right now. Tell him you represent an anonymous buyer who is prepared to acquire the entirety of Cromwell Hospitality Group. Offer him a price that's just high enough to cover his corporate and personal debt with North Star, plus a nominal amount for him to walk away with his dignity intact, say $1 million. It's a lowball offer, but it's also the only lifeline he's going to get before the bank seizes everything. He'll bite, Carter stated with absolute certainty. He's a proud man, but he's not stupid. $1 million and no public disgrace is better than bankruptcy and humiliation. The deal could be papered by morning. But why the sudden urgency, Sarah, and why a dying restaurant group, Shurn? Sarah looked at the entrance to the Beacon Crest where Finch's silhouette was still visible. Let's just call it a strategic acquisition in the hospitality sector, an experiment in brand revitalization. She paused. And Ben, there's one condition. The transfer of operational control for this specific location. The beacon crest must be effective immediately, verbally pending the paperwork. I want you to make it clear to Cromwell that the first act of the new ownership is to take possession of this property. Tonight. In the next few minutes, in fact. There was a long silence on the line. Carter was processing the sheer audacity of the request. He was connecting the dots between an emergency call from one of the most powerful tech CEOs in the world and a single failing restaurant. He didn't know the whole story, but he could guess the nature of it. Understood, he finally said, his voice imbued with a new level of respect. Consider it done. I'll call Cromwell myself. He knows my name, he'll take the call. You'll have your restaurant. Thank you, Benjamin, Sarah said. Send the preliminary agreement to Chloe's secure inbox. We'll review it tonight. It's on its way. Good hunting, Sarah. The line went dead. Sarah closed her phone and slipped it back into her pocket. She took a deep breath, the cool night air feeling clean and sharp in her lungs. She had just set in motion the acquisition of a multi-million-dollar company. The time elapsed since she had walked out of the restaurant was just under 10 minutes. Chloe stared at her jaw slack. You just bought the entire company, in 10 minutes, on a sidewalk. Sarah turned to her face calm, but her eyes blazing with a triumphant fire. I told you a lawsuit was too slow, she said. Now shall we go back inside? I believe our table is ready. Walking back through the heavy oak doors of the Beacon Crest was like stepping onto a stage for the second act of a play, where the hero, once vanquished, has returned with unforeseen power. The hushed atmosphere was the same. The patrons were still lost in their self-important conversations, but the energy had shifted. Serafina Hayes was no longer an intruder. She was an invading force. Bartholomew Finch was at his lectern polishing an already gleaming silver penholder. He looked up as Sarah and Chloe entered, and a visible wave of irritation crossed his face. His expression soured, curdling into a mask of pure condescension. He thought they had returned to plead, to argue, perhaps to make a scene. He straightened his tie, preparing to deliver another crushing, dismissive verdict. As I have already explained, he began, his voice dripping with venomous patience. We are fully committed. There is nothing I can do for you. I must ask you to leave. Sarah didn't stop at the lectern. She walked past it, her heels clicking with quiet authority on the marble floor, and stopped in the very center of the dining room. Chloe stood just behind her, a silent, formidable witness. The move was so unexpected that it momentarily stunned Finch into silence. A few diners paused, forks halfway to their mouths, sensing a disruption in the carefully controlled environment. We're not here for a table, Mr. Finch, Sarah announced, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying effortlessly across the room. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a boardroom, a voice accustomed to being heard and obeyed. Finch scurried out from behind his lectern, his face flushing a blotchy red. What is the meaning of this? You are disturbing our guests. This is a private establishment. It was, Sarah corrected him gently. It is now under new management, effective immediately. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Finch stared at her as if she had lost her mind. New management? That is preposterous. I am the general manager. I report directly to Mr. Alistair Cromwell. I think you are unwell. I will be calling security. Please do, Sarah said with a pleasant smile. And while you're at it, I suggest you call Mr. Cromwell as well. I believe he's expecting to hear from you. Finch's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone behind his desk. His confidence was beginning to fray at the edges. This woman's calm was unnerving, her certainty absolute. He dialed a number, his back partially turned to them, as if to shield his desperate call. Mr. Cromwell, sir, my apologies for the disturbance, he whispered into the receiver. There is a woman here, causing a scene, making outlandish claims about— Yes, sir, she said. New management. Finch's voice trailed off. His posture changed. The rigid spine seemed to dissolve. His face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. The hand holding the phone began to shake violently. He listened for another 30 seconds, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. He mumbled, Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, immediately. He hung up the phone, placing it back on the cradle with the unsteady hand of a very old man. He turned to face Serafina, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at her not as an unwanted customer, but as an executioner. Just then the front doors burst open again. A portly man in his late 60s with a flushed face, thinning gray hair, and a wildly expensive but poorly fitted suit stumbled into the restaurant. He was sweating profusely despite the cool evening. This was Alistair Cromwell, the proud owner, the dinosaur, the man who had just received the phone call of his life from Benjamin Carter. He saw Serafina standing in the center of his restaurant, and his face crumbled. He knew. "You!" Cromwell rasped, pointing a shaky finger at her. "It was you." "Mr. Cromwell," Sarah said, her tone professional, devoid of triumph. "I am Dr. Serafina Hayes. I believe we are now business partners, or rather I am the new proprietor of your former assets." The entire restaurant was now silent, all eyes fixated on the drama unfolding. This was better than any gossip they could have shared over their lobster thermidor. Cromwell ignored her. His panicked eyes fell on Finch. "What did you do, you idiot?" he hissed, his voice a hoarse whisper of despair. "What did you say to her?" Finch was ashen. "Sir, I was merely upholding our standards, our policy. She didn't have a reservation. Our standards." Cromwell choked out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Our standards just cost me everything." He turned back to Sarah, his desperation making him bold. "This is a hostile takeover. It's illegal. My lawyers will... Your lawyers have already been copied on the preliminary agreement from Sterling Peak Capital." Chloe interjected smoothly, stepping forward. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with the legal document. "The one Mr. Cromwell just verbally agreed to in order to avoid foreclosure and personal bankruptcy. The offer is fair, final, and entirely legal. It ensures you walk away with your debts cleared and your reputation, such as it is, intact. I suggest you take it." Cromwell deflated completely, the fight draining out of him, leaving a slumped, defeated old man. He knew he was cornered, trapped by his own arrogance and financial mismanagement. Sarah finally turned her attention back to the quivering man by the lectern. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though it seemed to echo in the silent room. "You were concerned earlier that I was not a suitable patron for this establishment. You were correct. I'm not a patron at all." She walked toward him, each step a hammer blow to his crumbling world. She stopped directly in front of him. "You are standing in my building, on my property, breathing my air," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "You were worried about upholding standards. Let's talk about standards. My standard is excellence. My standard is respect. My standard is integrity. You have failed on all three counts. You are fired." Finch flinched as if struck. "You can't." "I can," I have, Sarah stated. "Collect your personal belongings from your office. You have 5 minutes. A security team will be here shortly to escort you from the premises." She then turned to the stunned kitchen staff and waiters who had gathered by the service door, their eyes wide. She scanned their faces, looking for fear, for resentment, for an ally. Her eyes met those of a young waiter, a man named Leo, who had watched the entire initial exchange with a look of profound shame and helplessness. He met her gaze directly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Sarah addressed the entire room, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Serafina Hayes, and I am the new owner of this restaurant. For our guests, please accept my apologies for this interruption. Your meals tonight are complimentary. Consider it a gesture of goodwill as we begin a period of transition." She then looked at the staff. "For the staff, your employment is secure. Your paychecks will be honored. However, the culture of this establishment changes starting right now. We will be a place of welcome, of excellence, and of respect for all. The old way of doing things is over." She turned and gave one last look at Bartholomew Finch, who was being watched over by a now incredulous Chloe as he numbly gathered a few trinkets from his desk. Then she looked at the defeated Alistair Cromwell, who seemed to have aged 20 years in as many minutes. She hadn't just gotten a table. She hadn't just gotten an apology. She had taken the throne. And as she stood in the center of her new dining room, she knew the real work and the real karma had only just begun. The acquisition of a company is not a single event, but the start of a cascade. While the dramatic transfer of power had satisfied the immediate need for justice, Serafina Hayes was a builder, not a demolisher. She didn't just want to own the Beacon Crest. She wanted to transform it. And the first step in any transformation is understanding exactly what you're working with, warts and all. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the restaurant was closed to the public, a simple sign on the door reading, "Closed for renovation and staff retraining." Inside, however, it was a hive of activity. The quiet, stuffy air of the previous night had been replaced by the hum of quiet efficiency. Sarah had assembled her first-day team, a crack squad of specialists she deployed whenever she acquired a new asset. There was Chloe, of course, poring over Cromwell Hospitality's corporate bylaws and employment contracts. There were two operations managers from Ethereum's own corporate services division, assessing inventory and supply chains. And most importantly, there was a woman named Maria Flores. Maria was a forensic accountant, a small, unassuming woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for being able to make numbers, sing confess, and occasionally scream for mercy. She was Sarah's secret weapon, the one who found the rot beneath the floorboards. "All right, people," Sarah said, standing where the maître d's lectern used to be. She had ordered it removed first thing. It was a symbol of the old regime she wanted erased. "Chloe, legal review. I want to know every liability, every contract, every potential lawsuit Cromwell left behind." David, Sarah, ops review. "I want a full breakdown of suppliers' inventory waste and staffing inefficiencies. I want to know why a restaurant with these prices was bleeding cash." She then turned to Maria, who was already setting up her laptop and a portable scanner on one of the dining tables. "Maria, the books. I want a full deep dive forensic audit of the Beacon Crest going back 5 years. Every invoice, every receipt, every payroll record, every cash deposit. I'm not just looking for incompetence. I'm looking for deliberate deceit. Start with Mr. Finch's expense reports and the petty cash logs." "Nice, sir," Maria Flores smiled faintly. "Starting with the low-hanging fruit. I like it." As her team got to work, Sarah called a mandatory all-staff meeting. The 20 or so waiters, sommelier, hosts, and kitchen staff gathered nervously in the main dining room. They looked terrified. They had all witnessed the public executions of their two highest leaders and were expecting the axe to fall on them next. Sarah stood before them not as a conqueror, but as a leader. "Good morning," she began. "I know there is a lot of uncertainty right now, so let's clear the air. My intention is not to fire you all and start from scratch. My intention is to build something better, and I believe the talent to do that is already in this room." A small wave of relief washed over the group. "However," she continued, "as I said last night, the culture here is changing. The elitism, the exclusion, the idea that our job is to make people feel small, that is over. Our new mission is to be the best restaurant in Boston, not the most exclusive. We will be defined by the quality of our food, the excellence of our service, and the warmth of our welcome. To everyone." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This will require retraining. It will require a new mindset. For those of you who are willing to embrace this new vision, you have a future here. A better one. We will be instituting new pay scales, benefits, and opportunities for advancement. For those of you who are attached to the old ways," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, "I will offer you a generous severance package to pursue opportunities elsewhere. The choice is yours." She then did something that truly signaled a new era. She opened the floor to questions and comments. For the first few minutes, there was a hesitant silence. These employees had been trained to be silent and invisible. Finally, a hand went up. It was the young waiter from the night before Leo. "Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice a little shaky but clear. "My name is Leo. I wanted to say thank you." Sarah nodded at him. "For what, Leo?" "For what you did last night," he said, gaining confidence. "We all saw it. What Mr. Finch did, that wasn't unusual. It was just usually more subtle. We hated it. Most of us anyway. We got into this business because we love food. We love serving people and making them happy. But that spirit got crushed here. I just want you to know, some of us are really excited for a change." This broke the dam. Other staff members started to speak up. A chef from the kitchen mentioned supplier kickbacks he'd long suspected. A hostess spoke of a preferred guest list that was used to discriminate based on race and perceived social standing. A sommelier confessed that Finch often had him reserve the best vintages for a handful of Cromwell's friends, marking them as out of stock for other patrons. Piece by piece, the ugly truth of the Beacon Crest was laid bare. It wasn't just a snobbish restaurant, it was a systematically corrupt and prejudiced institution, rotten from the head down. Sarah listened to every word, her expression calm, but her mind filing away every detail. She was getting the ground truth she needed. Meanwhile, in her corner, Maria Flores was working her magic. By noon, she had found the first thread. "Sarah, come look at this," she said, her voice low. Sarah walked over to the table, which was now covered in spreadsheets and scanned documents. Maria pointed to a line item on her screen. "Petty cash reconciliation," she said. "Every week for the last 3 years, Finch has signed off on a withdrawal of exactly $2,500 for miscellaneous restaurant sundries. That's $130,000 a year in cash with no receipts. That's his slush fund," Sarah said. "Sloppy." "It gets sloppier," Maria replied, clicking to another screen. "I cross-referenced his expense reports. He also submitted monthly invoices from a company called Prestige Hospitality Solutions for consulting services. The invoices are for varying amounts, usually between $5,000 and $10,000. And let me guess," Chloe chimed in, walking over from her own mountain of paperwork. "Prestige Hospitality Solutions is a shell corporation." Maria nodded, a grim smile on her face. "I ran a quick check on the State Corporation Commission website. Prestige Hospitality Solutions was incorporated 4 years ago. The sole officer and registered agent is a one Mr. Bartholomew Finch. He was invoicing himself and approving the payments." Sarah let out a low whistle. "He wasn't just a bigot. He was a thief, an embezzler." "It's bigger than that," Maria said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. "This level of consistent fraud, it's rarely a one-man show. $2,500 a week in cash is for personal greed. But the fake consulting invoices, that feels different. That feels like he's washing money for someone else, someone he's terrified of." The implication hung in the air. Finch, for all his arrogance, was just a middleman. The rot didn't stop with him. It went higher. Sarah looked at the defeated face of Alistair Cromwell in her memory. She recalled his panicked, desperate question to Finch. "What did you do?" It wasn't just anger at a lost sale. It was the terror of a man whose entire house of cards was about to come crashing down. Finch's petty racism hadn't just insulted a customer. It had kicked the legs out from under a far larger, far dirtier criminal enterprise. "Maria," Sarah said, her voice cold and sharp, "I want you to trace where the money from Prestige Hospitality Solutions went. Every bank transfer, every check. Find its final destination." She looked around the dining room at her team working at the hopeful, nervous staff. This wasn't just a renovation anymore. It was an excavation, and she had a feeling they were about to hit a major tomb. For the next 48 hours, the Beacon Crest became the war room for a financial investigation. The scent of truffle oil was replaced by the aroma of hot electronics and brewing coffee. Maria Flores, fueled by an endless supply of espresso and a visceral hatred for cookbooks, descended into the digital and paper entrails of the Cromwell Hospitality Group. The picture that emerged was more corrupt than Sarah had even imagined. Bartholomew Finch's embezzlement was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. The fake invoices from Prestige Hospitality Solutions were indeed a money laundering scheme. The funds flowed from the restaurant's accounts into the shell company, and from there they were systematically funneled out, but not to Finch. "I found it," Maria announced late on the second night. Her voice was strained, but her eyes were triumphant. She pointed to her screen, which displayed a complex flowchart of bank transfers. The money from Finch's Shell Corp didn't go to a savings account in the Caymans. It didn't go to a stock portfolio. It went in dozens of small irregular payments to an online account for a high-stakes sports betting platform, an illegal one based out of Eastern Europe. Chloe leaned in, her lawyer's mind immediately grasping the implications. So Finch wasn't just stealing, he was paying off gambling debts. "Not his own," Maria clarified, clicking another window. "The account holder isn't Bartholomew Finch. The account is registered to Alistair P. Cromwell." A heavy silence fell over the table. It was the final damning piece of the puzzle. Alistair Cromwell, the man of old-world prestige and inherited status, was a gambling addict. He had been using his own flagship restaurant via his sycophantic manager as a personal piggy bank to feed his addiction and pay off his bookies. Finch's racism was appalling, but his greater sin in Cromwell's eyes was getting caught. He hadn't just provoked a new owner, he had exposed the rot at the core of the whole operation. His desperation to sell, Sarah mused aloud, it wasn't just about the bank loan from North Star. He was in deep with loan sharks. The sale wasn't just to save his company, it was probably to save his life. It explains everything, Chloe added. The financial mismanagement, the bleeding cash flow, his sheer panic. He wasn't running a business, he was servicing a debt. Sarah stood up and walked to the large windows looking out at the quiet, respectable facade of Beacon Hill. It was a perfect metaphor for Cromwell himself, a beautiful, historic exterior, hiding decay and desperation within. Her feelings were a complex mixture of cold satisfaction and a strange sort of pity. She had set out to teach a bigot a lesson, and in doing so had stumbled upon a whole dynasty of decay. "What's our next move?" Chloe asked. "We have enough here to put them both in prison for a very long time. Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion." Sarah was silent for a moment. She could call the district attorney's office. She could have them arrested, dragged out in handcuffs, and let the justice system run its course. It would be a public, messy, and satisfying spectacle. But Serafina Hayes played a longer game. A public trial would tie up the company in legal battles for years. It would taint the new brand she wanted to build. She wanted a cleaner, more absolute form of karma. "No police," Sarah said, finally turning back to the room. "Not yet. I want to handle this myself. Chloe, I want you to draft a confession and a settlement agreement. Maria, package every piece of evidence, every transaction, every fake invoice, every betting slip into a secure, encrypted file." An hour later, Sarah made 2 phone calls. The first was to Bartholomew Finch. The disgraced former manager answered on the first ring, his voice timid and broken. "Mr. Finch," Sarah said, her tone devoid of emotion. "Dr. Hayes, we need to have a conversation about your previous business dealings. My office. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Come alone." The second call was to Alistair Cromwell. "Cromwell," she said, dispensing with pleasantries. "What do you want?" he snarled, though the bravado was thin. "Haven't you done enough?" "I've discovered some irregularities in your accounting, Alistair," Sarah said calmly, "specifically regarding a shell company named Prestige Hospitality Solutions and its relationship with certain offshore gaming establishments. Does that ring a bell?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Sarah could practically hear the blood draining from his face. "My office," she continued, "tomorrow, 9 a.m. And Alistair, don't even think about running. The evidence I have has already been copied to several secure servers. Any failure to appear will result in that evidence being anonymously forwarded to the IRS, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Am I clear?" Cromwell made a choked, gurgling sound of assent before hanging up. The next morning, the 2 men arrived separately, looking like ghosts. Finch was gaunt and trembling, a cheap suit hanging off his shrunken frame. Cromwell looked haggard and aged, his expensive clothes seeming like a costume he no longer had the right to wear. Sarah had them shown into Ethereum Logic's main conference room, a vast, minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the Boston Harbor. It was a room designed to make people feel small and insignificant, a stark contrast to the cozy, oppressive opulence of the Beacon Crest. Sarah sat at the head of the massive table with Chloe by her side. Maria Flores was present via a secure video link, her face projected onto a large screen. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, "thank you for coming. We have a lot to discuss." For the next 30 minutes, with the cold precision of a surgeon, she and Chloe laid out the entire case. They detailed the embezzlement, the fake invoices, the shell company, the gambling addiction, the wire fraud. They presented bank statements, corporate filings, and transaction logs. It was an overwhelming, irrefutable mountain of evidence. Finch began to weep silently, his face in his hands. Cromwell stared at the tabletop, his face a stony mask of resignation. He was a king who had been checkmated from every possible angle. When the presentation was over, Chloe slid 2 documents across the table. "This is for you, Mr. Finch," she said. "It is a full confession. It details your role in the embezzlement scheme. You will sign it. In return, Dr. Hayes has agreed not to pursue private legal action for the funds you stole. The state, of course, may have other ideas once this information becomes public. Then she turned to Cromwell. And this is for you, Mr. Cromwell. It's a revised sales agreement. The original deal is null and void due to fraudulent misrepresentation. The new price for Cromwell Hospitality Group is $1. Cromwell's head snapped up. $1, that's theft. No, Sarah said, her voice like ice. Theft is what you did to your company, your employees, and your investors. $1 is the price for my silence. You will sign over the entire company free and clear of your gambling debts, which I will now have to settle. You will walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back. In exchange, the evidence of your extensive criminal activities will remain in my possession and not be handed over to the authorities. You get to avoid prison, Alistair. In my opinion, it's a far better deal than you deserve. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You built your world on a foundation of exclusivity and corruption. You judged people on their background while your own was rotten to the core. Now your world is mine. Your legacy is in my hands. Sign the papers. Trapped, humiliated, and utterly broken, the two men signed. Finch's signature was a shaky, tear-stained scrawl. Cromwell's was the angry, defiant slash of a deposed monarch signing his abdication. As they were escorted out by security, two broken men stripped of their power and their secrets, Sarah felt a quiet sense of finality. The dominoes had fallen, the rot had been excised. Now she could finally begin to build. In the months that followed, the transformation of the Beacon Crest was nothing short of miraculous. Seraphina Hayes did not just renovate a restaurant, she resurrected its soul. The first thing to go was the name. The Beacon Crest, with its connotations of snooty old-world exclusion, was stripped from the facade. After weeks of discussion with her new team, Sarah chose a new name, the Phoenix. It was a symbol of rebirth, of rising from the ashes of the old corrupt establishment. The dark, heavy interiors were gutted. The mahogany panels were replaced with warm, light-colored wood and exposed brick. The heavy damask was swapped for crisp, elegant linens in shades of cream and slate blue. Modern art curated from up-and-coming Boston artists, many of them people of color, now adorned the walls. The lighting was redesigned to be warm, inviting, and bright. The gilded cage became an open, airy haven, but the most significant changes were cultural. Sarah invested heavily in the staff. The young waiter, Leo, whose courage had impressed her, was promoted to a junior management training program. His salary doubled. He was now the face of the restaurant's new ethos, warm, genuine, and professional. The chef, freed from the constraints of Cromwell's kickback schemes and Finch's stuffy menu, was given creative freedom and a budget for the best local ingredients. The menu was completely overhauled, shifting from tired French classics to innovative modern American cuisine that celebrated New England's bounty. Sarah instituted a policy of radical hospitality. Reservations were handled by a fair first-come, first-served digital system. The dress code was eliminated, replaced with a simple note on the website, "Come as you are." Staff were trained not just in service etiquette, but in cultural sensitivity and inclusivity. Pay was raised across the board, and a profit-sharing program was implemented. For the first time, the staff felt like partners, not servants. The Phoenix opened its doors 3 months later to rave reviews. Critics who had once lambasted the Beacon Crest for being a fossil now praised the Phoenix for its vibrant energy, superlative cuisine, and genuinely welcoming atmosphere. It quickly became the most sought-after reservation in Boston, not because of who it kept out, but because of who it welcomed in. The clientele was a vibrant mix of the city tech entrepreneurs and artists, old Beacon Hill families, and students from Cambridge, people of every race, background, and age. It was a success beyond Sarah's wildest dreams. But what of the men who had started it all? What was the final hard karma for Finch and Cromwell? Bartholomew Finch, having signed a confession, was swiftly arrested. The district attorney, armed with an airtight case, made an example of him. He was convicted of embezzlement and fraud and sentenced to 3 to 5 years in a medium-security prison. His name became a local cautionary tale about the perils of arrogance and theft. Alistair Cromwell's fate was quieter, but perhaps more punishing. Stripped of his company, his wealth, and his status, he vanished from the Boston social scene. The $1 he received was a final deep insult from which his pride would never recover. With Sarah's company settling his massive debts to avoid legal entanglements, his former loan sharks had no reason to pursue him, but he was left with absolutely nothing. The last anyone heard, he had moved to a small, dreary town in the Midwest to live with a distant relative, a broken and forgotten man. One chilly autumn evening, about a year after the takeover, Serafina Hayes was sitting at a corner table in the Phoenix having a quiet dinner with Chloe. The restaurant was buzzing with happy conversation and the clinking of glasses. Leo, looking sharp and confident in his manager's suit, came over to their table. "Dr. Hayes, Ms. Jensen," he said with a warm smile. "Everything to your liking tonight." "It's perfect, Leo. Absolutely perfect," Sarah said, looking around the vibrant room. "You and the team are doing an incredible job." As Leo walked away, Chloe leaned in. "You know, there's one last piece of this puzzle you might find interesting. The final karma, you could say." "Oh," Sarah asked, intrigued. "I was reviewing the final capitalization reports from Sterling Peak Capital," Chloe explained. "Benjamin Carter used a number of subsidiary funds for the Cromwell acquisition. One of the largest was the Patriot Pension Fund. I did a little digging. It's the pension fund for retired state and municipal workers from Massachusetts." Sarah looked puzzled. "Okay," Chloe smiled. "The fund represents thousands of retired teachers, sanitation workers, firefighters, clerks, the very people Finch and Cromwell would have considered beneath them. The people they would never have let through their doors. The ultimate irony, Sarah, is that it was their money, the money of the working class, the diverse, everyday people of this state, that Benjamin Carter used to buy this place. It was their capital that sealed Cromwell's fate and gave you the power to fire Finch." Serafina sat back, a slow, wide smile spreading across her face. It was more perfect than she could have designed. The very people the old establishment sought to exclude were unknowingly the instruments of its downfall. Their hard-earned money had fueled the revolution. She looked around her restaurant at the beautiful tapestry of humanity enjoying the fruits of that revolution. It wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. The Phoenix hadn't just risen from the ashes of a failed restaurant. It had risen on the quiet, collective strength of all the people who had ever been told they didn't belong. And that was the most delicious justice of all. That right there is not just a story of revenge. It's a masterclass in the art of the comeback. It's about how true power isn't about shutting people out, but about having the vision and the strength to build something better in its place. Dr. Serafina Hayes didn't just get even. She changed the entire game. She turned a moment of ugly discrimination into a beacon of progress, proving that the most effective response to being told, "You can't sit here," is to buy the whole building and redesign the table so everyone has a seat. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the best karma isn't loud and explosive, but quiet, calculated, and absolutely life-changing. If this story of ultimate justice and empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that the game can be changed. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of epic comebacks and karma served cold. Thanks for listening.